All right. Hello, and welcome to the last section of the nervous system note. This is going to deal with the cerebellum and any kind of damage and or infection to the nervous system or any kind of malfunctions. So we'll talk about all of those things, and the nervous system will be done. Whoops, lost it there. What happened here? All right, let's try that again. Okay, so let's see what we got. We talked about the cerebrum already. That's what we dealt with, things like voluntary movement and senses. And we talked about the brain stem. That was the pons and the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. And now we're going to focus on the cerebellum, which is right there. So the cerebellum is going to be all about the two big words, coordination and balance. And in with there is going to be something called equilibrium, keeping everything straight, keeping everything balanced, and muscle tone. Now, this muscle tone is not the going to the gym with a six-pack abs. This is lots of micro adjustments that take place every second of your life to keep you, in essence, standing up. And what'll happen, where it is it's located again towards the back/bottom of the brain. Again, it's pretty well protected, which is good, which is hopefully nice. And, we want to keep that straight. So what do we got? Well, in the event that you injure your cerebellum, and it could happen, you're going to see some things. You're going to become uncoordinated. You may sway or stagger when walking, because remember, walking is a very coordinated activity. You may lose some coordination of motor activity even in your arms. You're going to have a hard time judging distance. So, for example, it may look 20 feet away, but it's only 10. So if you're driving and you're going to hit something, you're going to have a hard time doing rapid alternating movements, moving, let's say, drumsticks or something. That would be a rapid alternating movement. You may have some tremors, so where you'll be sitting still, but you'll be shaking. You may have some wide base walking. That's sort of kind of how like a baby starts to walk because they're not very coordinated. You might fall. You're going to have, again, now with those weak muscles because all that, your muscle tone is all whacked out, so you're not getting the signals correct. You're going to have kind of slurred speech, and your eyes are going to be kind of all over the place, kind of wild eyes. So all of those things are going to happen if you have damaged your cerebellum. So let's talk about some protections, and then we'll get into the final portion of this presentation. So you have a lot of protections of your brain. You have your scalp and skin. That's going to keep, the basic bacteria out. Then you have the bone portion. That's going to protect you against, getting hit, kind of. Then you have this, I kind of call it like a wrapping, like a saran wrap wrapping, but it's kind of like a Kevlar wrapping called the meninges, and you're going to have this around your brain, and it's going to kind of line your cranium and vertebrae. It's a double kind of membrane deal, which is neat. You're going to have this stuff called cerebrospinal fluid, which is going to be all about a cushioning. And then finally, something called the blood-brain barrier, which is going to allow certain things to get in and certain things to not get in. So it's going to be very selective. So let's talk about some protections. And you will not need this diagram, but you can see where everything is. So there's your scalp. And again, it doesn't look like it's going to do that much, but it's going to keep the bacteria out definitely. That's your bone end, which we talked about in the skeletal system. Then here is this, I guess we'll call it a space. Where's the space there? It's kind of like right there. And that's where your cerebrospinal fluid will be. And then you have your dura mater, otherwise known as your meninges, and it's a double layer of protection. Again, we'll see it more as we go. So the dura mater, otherwise known, aka we'll kind of keep it like a little arrow there, is your meninges, and it's a double layer system. And one layer is going to be attached to your actual skull, and the other layer is going to kind of wrap your brain. So let's say that's the bones of your skull right there, and that's your brain right there. You're going to have one wrapper on your brain, one wrapper on your skull, because you don't want your brain to rub up against your skull. And in that area right there is where you're going to have your cerebral spinal fluid. Now, in the event that you do get hit hard enough and your brain bumps up against the inside of your cranium, that could be a concussion or even more brain damage. But again, we'll see that as we go. So your meninges, otherwise known as your dura mater, are double-layered protection, wrapping both your bone and your actual brain. That's one kids mess up a lot. The cerebral spinal fluid is very similar to blood plasma. So it's got, a lot of goodies in it. It's got some immune protection in there. It's going to be a cushion. It's going to hopefully help keep your brain from bumping into your cranium, and that will help through, just by walking and stuff. And again, if you get hit hard enough, you hope that you're protected. You might get a headache, but you hopefully don't get a concussion. It's going to be formed by your choroid plexus, so that's where it comes from. And it's going to circulate, and that's what it does. It just moves through. Now, in the event that you get what is known as a spinal tap, because it does go down through your spinal cord area as well, that's where they can test the fluid for something if you may have an infection called meningitis. So it is, again, don't worry too much about this picture, so I don't want you to get too crazy about this. Yep, so skip right over that. And let's see. Okay, so there's your choroid plexus right there. So if you look, it's kind of like in the middle of your brain, and that's where this cerebrospinal fluid is produced. And if you look at it, it flows. And you can see it just kind of flowing throughout your entire central nervous system. And that's what keeps your brain protected and cushioned. If it is infected, that could be a major, major, major problem called meningitis. We'll see that in a bit. The blood-brain barrier is really neat. And what it does is it has capillaries, but they're very not permeable, which means they don't let a lot of things through. And that's good because you hope to exclude many things that could be bad for you. But here's what they will let in. They will let in fat-soluble molecules because they're going to get right through the plasma membrane. They're going to let in respiratory gases like CO2 and O2 because you have to be able to get those in and out so you can bring the gases to your brain that it needs. Alcohol and nicotine. This is why I don't smoke, but this is why people that smoke cigarettes, after that first inhale, after a few seconds, they just feel this overwhelming calm. It's because the nicotine, once it gets into your lungs, gets into your blood, it pumps around within less than a minute. It's now to your brain. And once it kind of gets through this blood-brain barrier, it kind of sets you at ease or maybe makes you less jittery. If you drink enough alcohol, you will find that it also gets through your blood-brain barrier pretty quick once it gets absorbed from your digestive system. And you'll see that it'll definitely play on your brain. And then, of course, you hope anesthesia, because anesthesia, if it did not get through your blood-brain barrier, it wouldn't work. And it works pretty quick if any of you have ever gone under anesthesia. Not the same as something like Novocaine or lidocaine that you would get at the dentist. Not the same. So a couple of traumatic brain injuries we're going to talk about. Some of you may have had a concussion. Once again, luckily to this day I have not, so let's hope to keep it that way. Again, it's very slight brain injury. You may have a headache for a week or two. With any luck, if it's your first one and it wasn't too bad, you're going to have no permanent brain damage. If this happens to get repeated a lot, especially in contact sports, hockey, football, anywhere where boxing, these repeated brain injuries and concussions could lead to potential damaging, very permanent damage. If you have a contusion, then you really got hit hard. You had nervous tissue destruction. And as we learned in some of the other units that were in the beginning of this one, once your nervous tissue is gone, it's gone, because we know that nervous tissue does not regenerate. So really bad brain injuries, you have to be super careful of those. And then a cerebral edema could cause some swelling. And then what happens, unfortunately, if your brain swells, it's going to push up against your cranium, which does not expand. And this compression may kill brain tissue. And we already know that once the brain tissue is gone, it's gone. Some other cerebrovascular accidents we may call a stroke, because whenever we talk about vascular issues is where the blood vessels will break. It's a ruptured blood vessel. And what happens is if the brain tissue does not get the appropriate oxygen, it will die. So not getting oxygen is, in the world of brains, just as bad as pushing up against the inside of your cranium or getting hit hard enough and damaging it. And in some strokes, you may lose some function or you may die. So if you know someone that has survived a stroke, which hopefully they did and all is well, they may have lost some function of their body, but they are still alive, which is good. And hopefully they caught it early enough and did not lose very many functions at all. Alzheimer's is progressive and it's degenerative. If you don't know what that word means, it means it only gets worse. And it's obviously mostly seen in the elderly. Okay, but it could start middle age, but most of the time it is in the elderly. And here you will end up with structural changes of your brain. And included in the, symptoms would be memory loss, irritability, confusion, hallucinations, and death. Unfortunately, my Aunt Josie had that for many, many, many years, and it's very sad when your relatives don't recognize you because they have, in essence, been confused or had total memory loss. So Alzheimer's that's a tough one. Your spinal cord itself, which we talked about. It extends from the medulla right up there, and this is where things get a little interesting. It goes down to about T12. So T12 is basically at the bottom of your ribs. That's where it's called the spinal cord. After that, it's going to start, I don't want to say fray because it's not a great word, but after there, that's where it's going to start to kind of spread out, if you will, and go down to your lower body. So your true spinal cord stops at T12. It's going to kind of branch out in that lumbar region. The spinal cord anatomy, you're not going to be held responsible for this, but I just wanted you to see that it does have a blood supply. It does have the dura mater there. It does have the meninges. And it does have places for nerves to leave. And again, we're not going to get hung up in that, so don't worry too much about this one. And if there is any white matter, always know that that is conductive tracts. And if it's white, we know that has myelin on it. Don't worry too much about this, except where you see gray matter. Just remember cell bodies, but we did that last time. Central canal is filled with your cerebral spinal fluid. So once again, if we're going to do a spinal tap, and hopefully none of you have ever needed that, but if you did, they stick a needle into your vertebrae in between them and take out cerebral spinal fluid, but it's better than digging into your brain. So hopefully you will live your life. So far, I've made it all these years and no spinal taps, so hopefully you will make it as well. Once again, the meninges, as we talked about, cover the spinal cord, and there's various nerves. But again, don't get too hung up with this slide. I'm just going to put a line through it so you don't memorize it or have to worry too much about it. Now, a nerve itself, let's talk about the nerve, because we talked about a nerve cell, and we know that a nerve cell has this dendrites and the cell body and the axon terminal. But that's only one nerve, uno, cell. So if you look at that axon right there, that is one nerve cell, otherwise known as a neuron. Now, a nerve, the things that go places, as you can see, are made up of a lot of nerve cells. And just like when we talked about the muscle, that was made up of a lot of muscle cells made up a muscle, a lot of nerve cells make up a nerve. And there's your blood supply, which of course. Now we're going to see words that are very similar. Instead of endomysium, it's going to be called an endoneurium, and that's what surrounds each individual nerve cell. Then the perineurium is going to wrap that group of nerve cells, and that whole package deal is called the fascicle, just like it was last time. And then when we had the epimysium, now we're going to have the epineurium, and that's going to be your tough outer wrapping. So if anything is tough, that's your toughest. Now, it's obviously not as tough as a muscle cell, but it's going to be, the toughest of the bunch. So your endoneurium surrounds each fiber. That's very, very delicate. Then we have these things called the fascicles, which we talked about, in the muscle, just like in a nerve. And then everything's all held together by the epineurium. So you will see that picture again, so focus on it. We don't have to talk too much about this because we know about this already for like the 5th time. Afferent nerves or sensory nerves, they're going to go into the central nervous system. The motor nerves are going to leave the central nervous system. And again, we've been there, done that. And then there are very few that are mixed nerves, but these are going to be primarily your cranial nerves. So they're going to be the ones that are coming out of your brain and maybe going to things like your eyes. So we'll talk about them as we go. There are 12 cranial nerves, but we will not need to know the details on those, but I'll just tell you what they are. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, as I just mentioned 2 seconds ago, and they're going to be numbered. You're not going to have to know the numbers. You're not going to have to memorize anything except that there are 12 of them, and that most of those 12 are mixed nerves. Most of them, 3 of them are not, but most of them are. And they're going to do 2 things. They're going to do motor and sensory. And the reason why is because they're really short. So if you look at them, most of them go to places in and around your face, like this one here goes to your nose. These go to your eyes. These go to your face. This goes to your jaw muscles. This goes to the muscles in your head and your mouth. So 2 of them kind of go out into your respiratory and digestive system, but for the most part, they're near your head and neck. So to use motor and sensory running parallel to each other is silly when they can both do the same thing. So that's where your cranial nerves go. And you will not need any of these numbers or to memorize them, but I just wanted to show you that some are for smell, some are for vision, some are to move your eyes. So they're very varied and they're numbered, and there are, once again, 12 of them. As you can see, we got hearing, we got some taste. We have some muscles that are going to help us chew. We have some that go down into our respiratory system. We have some that hang out, once again, that control our tongue. A lot of people don't even think about that, but it's a pretty big deal. So, again, 12 of them. You don't need to know what their names are or really what they do. It's that there are 12. And then finally, as usual, how does it all come together? Now, the nervous system is formed very early in your embryonic development. So like in the first month of your development, not even of your being born life, of your development. And it actually starts in, if you remember, the gastrula phase of development. But we did that way back in the reproductive system. And there are some maternal infections that could be harmful, so you want to be careful that mom doesn't do bad things like drugs or drink too much or do anesthesia. All of those things are bad. And the hypothalamus was one of the last areas of the brain to develop. And very importantly, so once you are born, you got all the neurons you're going to get. So will they grow and will they make more connections? They will, and they will mature, but they do not replicate. So if you damage them throughout your life, in your young life, they don't come back. So be very, very, very careful about that. And you guys are almost there, but your brain is going to reach its maximum weight as a young adult, and then it only gets worse. And I never thought I would be that guy that forgets stuff and forgets kids' names, but well, I have. So I used to be like up here, and now I'm like, whoop. So if I forget your name, do not be personally insulted. I'm sorry if I do. It is just, my brain is shot. Yours will be too. So remember this. Okay, so that is the nervous system all wrapped up. I cut it down to a couple of days. Look for projects, look for tests, and we will, I'll get the notes out to you and the videos posted as soon as I can. All right, good luck.